Hello everyone and welcome to the last show of the week for the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in. On today's show, we should have another exciting crop of player profiles, specifically on the Eastern Seaboard. We have NFC East mainly in terms of player profiles, but also we throw one AFC East guy in there because I think he can be a standout player and we don't want to exclude him. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you guys to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. Also, if you do feel so inclined, we do receive a ton of tips and donations, so if you would like to, leave them at the link gsmc.cloud. You get a little sneak preview of one of my segments. It is a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and ultimately the network as a whole. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. If you also have any burning questions, comments, or concerns about any of my prior segments or any concerning this show, then you can leave them right here and they will be answered and addressed at the beginning of the next episode. So without further ado, let's jump right into the show. And let's start off in the world of the NFC East, the team that is slowly starting to build its defensive front, and this guy is a huge part of that rebuild. A guy who has cemented himself as one of the premier defensive tackles in not only the NFC East, but the entire NFL, and a guy who I really like in terms of IDP leagues, and that is Dexter Lawrence. When you think about the Giants' defense, though, Dexter Lawrence doesn't really come to mind as someone who can dominate the interior of an offensive line in terms of pass rush ability. You see, they added Kayvon. They already had Kayvon Thibodeau. They added Bobby Okereke at the linebacker position as well. And then they added Brian Burns off the edge. So there is now a wealth of talent surrounding Dexter Lawrence at the defensive tackle position, but I still believe that there is merit to what he does and how he goes about redefining the defensive tackle position, because he puts up good production stats as well, and that's something to keep in mind as you look at this Giants defensive front, because as it adds more pieces, Dexter Lawrence still will remain the most important piece, due to the fact that he is not only just opening up lanes for others, but he himself can stop the run, can get some tackles, and can also get to the quarterback as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into the stats that define Dexter Lawrence in terms of fantasy. Throughout his career, he's accumulated 395.9 fantasy points. His best season was in 2022, when he got 115.5 fantasy points. Last year was a solid year for him. 32 solo tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 21 QB hits, and he's looking to really have a career-defining season now with the talent that he wants surrounding him. And he can focus more on, developing as a defensive tackle, because over the past couple of years, even before Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence was a young, inexperienced guy who kind of forced his way into this Giants front. He's shown he's sharp at the position, he's shown his intelligence, he's shown his development, and he's shown the skill and strength it requires to hold down a defensive tackle spot in the NFL. And when I look at other defensive tackles, there may be bigger ones, there may be stronger ones, there may be faster ones. But I think that Dexter Lawrence, now especially, is one who's going to grow and develop due to him now having a support system that he can rely upon to help him get focused more on opening up space for them. Because right now, where I see him, he is kind of more of a pass rusher, so to speak. He can get to the quarterback. He can get tackles for loss. And while that's all good for, being a significant part, I don't think he's going to be the significant part anymore, because there's now 4 or 5 guys above him who can be seen as guys who will get more production than him. And we're going to talk about Kayvon Thibodeau a little bit later in the show. And he is someone who's definitely going to see a lot more action, a lot more blitzes from that linebacker position, a lot more opportunities for him to get going. And so where that puts Dexter Lawrence is in a really weird spot where he's kind of going to have to realize that the many ways he can benefit this team lay not just in, getting the tackles for loss and penetrating into the backfield, but it's for allowing better players to get their opportunities, because Brian Burns is an incredible asset to that defensive front. It now alleviates some of the pressure Dexter Lawrence has in occupying the guards that he's responsible for, and Brian Burns can just create for himself, and then all Dexter Lawrence needs to do is say, I'm going to occupy the guards and centers in front of me and allow for guys like Thibodeau and Okirike to then come down from the linebacker position to blitz as well. Because in this 3-4 system, I think the Giants are really going to focus a lot on individual pressures coming from players like Burns and Okirike. That's why they got a guy like Brian Burns. I think he really fits this 3-4 defense well, and he really complements what Dexter Lawrence can do in terms of, plugging the run more. Because I think when I consider the Giants' linebacker core, which I believe is the best aspect of their defense, they're very blitz-heavy guys. I think that Kayvon Thibodeau always likes to rush the passer. He's always going to be more comfortable in terms of tackling, in terms of sideline-to-sideline lateral movement, and ultimately getting to the ball. And I think Bobby Okirike also kind of fits that mold, but he's still solid in coverage. I like Bobby Okirike because he forces turnovers. I like him because he's an agile linebacker, and I like him because Kayvon Thibodeau can sim pressures, and they can kind of switch between which one of them is on the blitz. And so, I look at the makeup of the Giants' defense and how Dexter Lawrence fits within it. I'm really liking Dexter Lawrence as the guy to stack blockers, maybe get in the run game, and ultimately develop more as a prototypical defensive tackle instead of a guy who can contribute in the pass rush. Because at the current moment, as it stands, when I think of premier Giants pass rushers, before it was Kayvon Thibodeau, then Dexter Lawrence. Now it's Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Bobby Okirike, and Dexter Lawrence. So how the Giants are going to develop Dexter Lawrence is going to be integral to his stats he's going to put up. But in terms of fantasy, in terms of IDP especially, when you're looking at defensive tackles, it's very hard to find one who already has the intelligence and experience and know-how to combine their ability to stack and then also understand what it means to be a pass rusher as well. And Dexter Lawrence primarily fits that mold because he came into a Giants defense that was still rebuilding, retooling. Before Kayvon Thibodeau came, before they really started to get serious and make good acquisitions, much like they did with Brian Burns and Okirike. So Dexter Lawrence understands what it means to be in a defense that isn't fully molded. And so, while there are definitely a lot of factors that can factor into perhaps him not producing as much as you want him to, he still is so talented because of what he had to go through before to get to the point where he is now. And so, in this system, he may not be the prettiest option in terms of stat line, especially this season. But also, he has the benefit of having been here for a while, one of the longest tenured Giants defenders. And he also has the benefit of knowing the system. Ryan Burns and Bobby Okereke will have to work their way into the system. And so they might get off to slower starts, and that opens the door for Dexter Lawrence to pad his stats earlier in the season. And also, since the Giants play a 3-4, there's a lot more lenience to how Dexter Lawrence plays. Because in a 3-4, a lot of your pass rush is derivative of your linebackers as well. As we can see, Kayvon Thibodeau later, his stats can be seen as more of an edge rusher. So the way the Giants play their 3-4 truly makes Dexter Lawrence someone you have to keep your eye on and can catch your attention. And that's really to his benefit in a system that, while is certainly the best it's been, can certainly start to find its footing later in the season and will truly help Dexter Lawrence in terms of getting him to understand the role while also maintaining his dominance as potentially a pass rushing force. And that duality is what makes me consider him as one of the best defensive tackles to go out and get in an IDP draft. That will just about do it for this segment. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Dexter Lawrence is definitely someone you should think about. Coming next, we go to one of the established veterans of the NFC East at the corner position in kind of a transitional period for this Eagles secondary. We are going to talk a little bit more about Darius Slay when we come back on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.